Okay, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar today. I'm Helene, I'm PR trainee at LifeSize, and I'll be hosting today's webinar along with our PR manager, Lee.
Hi.
And we're really excited to host our 10th LifeSize webinar already today, and our second one about one of our favorite and core topics at LifeSize, and this is PR, public relations. And we had our first PR webinar on PR basics last September. And today we want to build on and expand on this. However, you don't need to worry if you weren't at the last webinar. Lee will recap the most important PR basics before we delve deeper into the material. But before we get started, it would be great if Lee and I can get to know those on the webinar a bit better. So in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, you can type your name and where you're tuning in from. And we'll start. So I'm working from my home office in Leipzig today. Leipzig is a German city close to Berlin, for those of you who don't know. And Lee is working from his home office in London. I think you all know where this is. Hi, Nicholas. So Nicholas is tuning in from Berlin. And then we have Sawyer tuning in from London today.
Marco from Slovenia as well, and Jonas from Sweden. Kristen from Dresden.
Oh, nice.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so while the rest of you is signing where they're tuning in from today, I will run through today's agenda and do some housekeeping quickly. So the aim of today's webinar is to show you how you can improve your PR machine and secure impactful coverage. So Lee will start with a quick recap of the basics of PR work and then move on to our second section on how to successfully pitch to journalists. And in the following section, I will provide you with some tips on how you can talk to journalists effectively and prepare for a successful interview. Then I'll hand back over to Lee again, who will guide you on the way to receive mainstream media coverage. And afterwards, we will take time to answer all your questions in a Q&A section. So if you're joining us live and have any questions throughout the webinar, we have enabled the Q&A function also all the time. So you can type any questions that come to mind, and we'll try to answer them when they come through. But if this isn't possible, we'll do so at the end. And finally, if you experience any technical issues, please pop them into the chat box, and our colleague Manon, who is in the background today, will help you resolve them as quickly as possible. Yeah, so for any questions, use the Q&A function, and for any technical issues, the chat box. Okay, then let's get started. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks, Helena. So yeah, as we explained during our first PR webinar last year, for those of you that did attend, PR encompasses all aspects of communications and all aspects of communicating with the media. Its importance shouldn't be underestimated. And in fact, as you probably know, if you've worked with us in the past or do so at the moment, we're big believers that when done right, PR can directly help a company achieve its commercial goals. So first things first, let's just do a recap. So when I say PR, I don't mean marketing, I don't mean advertising. You don't pay to receive PR coverage. So that means that the language and the style of your PR content should be very different from your marketing material. Your PR needs to be insightful, it needs to be interesting, and it should support journalist writing. PR activities can take many forms. You can send out press releases, whether that's about latest financing rounds, your newest customer contracts, or project milestones. You can give interviews to the press and also appear on podcasts. Obviously, that's a very popular form of communicating generally these days. You can write thought leadership articles and have those covered via trade publications. You can provide commentary and sound bites on the latest news relating to your industry. So that wouldn't be an article purely about your company, but you're involved in a wider piece about your industry and about what's happening at the moment. And I really want something that's becoming more substantially vital at the moment is engaging with journalists on social media. Especially during the pandemic era, options are reduced for meeting anyone in person, let alone journalists. So this is becoming more critical, and I'll touch on this later in the webinar. Speaking of journalists, one of the most fundamental yet crucial parts of PR is building relationships with journalists. It's not a given that just by simply sending them a press release or pitching them one email, you're going to receive coverage. Journalists are incredibly busy, and the chances are you probably won't even receive a response to that email, unfortunately. I actually attended a webinar last week, and a well-known tech journalist actually revealed that he receives upwards of 80 different pitches every single day. That illustrates kind of how competitive and how difficult it is to catch journalists' attention. So building relationships with journalists takes time and effort, but doing so should increase your chances of getting your company's name out there. We'll touch on more on pitching to journalists in the next section of this webinar. Something you can plan in advance that will save you time when building relationships with journalists, however, is ensuring that you have your basic press office set up. You should have a media kit available online featuring your company essentials that journalists can easily access and download. This should include your company logo, your boilerplate, headshots and bios for your senior leadership, and any project images that you have. Another area of your press office that is very important is the press lists, and that is doing your research into journalists in advance of relevant journalists that are writing about your area of industry. So you need to be ready for when you have press releases to share or pictures to send, have this list ready and available. You should also have a press contact listed on your website so that journalists can quickly identify who to get in touch with should they have any media inquiries that they want to get in touch with you with. You should also plan a news calendar so you know what you have coming up over the next quarter, over the next 6 months, even up to a year away. That ensures that, again, you're ready and can be prepared to contact journalists, whatever that news is or whatever the milestone is that's coming up. As you know, at Lifesize as well, we are big believers in strategic communications, and no matter your budget, you need a strategy to run an effective PR campaign. Without a written strategy, you'll be wasting valuable time and resources. You need to know which of your audience you're trying to communicate with via PR and have a clear idea of what they're interested in, where they get their news from, and which publications they read. It's only once you've set your PR strategy that you'll be ready to execute it. Finally, on the subject of PR basics, there are a number of external tools out there that you can use and help you run an effective PR campaign, no matter what budget you have. Here at Lifesize, we use Google and Talkwalker alerts. They're both free resources that you can use to track news, track subjects, technology, and we use it to track our clients and also their industries as well. We also use Response Source's journalist inquiry service, which is a very useful way of finding out when journalists need help writing an article or when they're looking for interviewees. There's even a free alternative to this if your PR budget can't stretch that far, and that's by following the journo request hashtag on Twitter. This is where journalists often call out for potential interviewees or assistance with an article. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the PR basics, as we've already covered it. Just wanted to give you a bit of a refresher. So let's move on to the real topic of today's webinar, which is how to secure high-value media coverage. We'll start that by looking at how to pitch to journalists, and I'm going to continue. Pitching to journalists is an essential part of public relations. As well as distributing press releases, it's the most effective way of earning press coverage and bringing recognition to your business. To do it successfully, you need to know what a pitch is exactly, how to write an effective one, and when to contact the media, when's the right time. Let's look at this in a bit more detail. Every proactive pitch needs a hook. This is the way you present your news, your story, or your idea, so that it demonstrates the newsworthiness and catches the attention of journalists. The hook you lead with will depend on what type of content you're pitching. So here are some common examples. Offer a new perspective, provide new insights, share the counter argument. A word of caution with this one, however, journalists don't appreciate negative pitches, so don't be critical of your competitors. This isn't a good look and isn't going to get you journalists' attention. Another hook is breaking new ground. If your clean tech company is doing something that's never been done before, you need to shout about it from the rooftops. So now I'm going to repeat something I said earlier. Journalists are incredibly busy, with some even receiving around 80 different pitches a day. This shows how difficult it will be to even receive a response from a journalist to a proactive pitch, which is why you need to structure it so it stands out from the crowd. In clean tech, it's a crowded landscape, so this is ever more important. Let's start with a subject line. This is your first opportunity to grab the journalist's attention. Include the journalist's name at the start of the pitch at the start of the subject line, and then explain the topic of your pitch simply and succinctly. Then moving on to the content of the pitch itself, you should use the opening paragraph to provide context and personalize it to the journalist you're pitching to by relating the subject to something they've recently written about. This shows that you've done your research into the journalist and you're also aware of what they're writing about, and it shows that you're engaging with what they're producing. The opening of your pitch should be powerful. Set the scene and show that you know what you're talking about. The next paragraph should be used to start building your hook. Always ensure that you support this with data, facts, research, references, anything that supports the angle that you're pitching. The following paragraph can be used to fully flesh out the angle if needs be. However, be wary of providing too much information at this stage. The longer the pitch, the more chance a journalist will not bother reading it. So save them time by being succinct, and remember that the juicy parts are what you actually want to offer in the article or in the interview that you're offering. Once you've clearly and concisely explained your hook, you should introduce your company and explain why you're experts in this chosen field and therefore qualified to talk about the subject in question. This is a great opportunity to use some of your key messages or the one paragraph section of your messaging guidelines should you have already produced them. Finally, you should end the pitch with what you're actually offering to the journalists. This can take many forms. It could be an interview opportunity, pitching yourself to appear on a podcast, writing a thought leadership article, or just providing comment as part of a wider story. Here's an example of how to structure a pitch using life size. I've used a recent IPCC report as a hook, and I'm targeting James Murray, the editor of Business Green, Europe's leading source of information on the green economy and business, with the pitch. The opening paragraph sets the scene, as you can see, and it references a recent article that he wrote on the subject. So I know that I'm pitching to someone that is interested in the IPCC report. The context is that there is cause for optimism despite the report's overall damning findings, and that Cleantech has an essential role to play in reversing the impacts of climate change. I've then ended the pitch with details of who Lifesize is. We hope he knows that already, but in this case, we'll just explain who we are again, and also what we're offering. In this case, it's an interview with a number of our clients about their respective technologies. The two sections I just covered were for successful proactive pitching. However, reactive pitching can be just as important and also lead to great coverage. Here's some advice for ensuring you take advantage of the latest industry movements and are ready to pitch your business as a source of expertise. You should monitor the news by using free tools such as the Google and Talkwalker alerts that we mentioned earlier, or even spending some of your PR budget on platforms such as Meltwater that are media monitoring services. Be prepared. Ideally, you should have a document of answers to questions you're likely to be asked by journalists. You can save yourself time by getting this approved in advance, and you can then just go out and pitch to your heart's content, knowing that the answers are approved, factual, correct, and you save time. And that's always important with reactive pitching, because generally there's going to be lots of companies out there reacting to industry news. Take your time and pick your moments. Cleantech is here to solve the climate crisis, which isn't a flash in the pan. The climate crisis isn't going away anytime soon, unfortunately. So don't attempt to shoehorn your business into a story if the link isn't strong enough. There's going to be plenty of opportunities over the years to comment. Identify your target journalists and publications in advance. And finally, make use of your assisting content. Marketing material, sales brochures, investment assets, all can be powerful forms of thought leadership if they're repurposed and can be used as interview briefings or even as the reactive comment pieces themselves. Before I pass over to Helene for the next section, I just quickly want to touch on the growing importance of social media when it comes to engaging with journalists. As I mentioned previously, this is growing in importance. Thanks to the pandemic, it's harder than ever to meet journalists in person. Industry events have been cancelled or moved online. People are working from home more regularly, while restrictions on travel and hospitality mean it's not quite as simple as it used to be to just arrange a quick coffee or go for a bite to eat. Interacting on social media is now one of the best ways of building relationships with journalists. The best platform to do this on is actually Twitter. LinkedIn is good for sales and where your customers are, but Twitter is where journalists are most active. One journalist I recently spoke to, in fact, described Twitter as a goldmine for journalists. You should build a relationship with them on Twitter like you would do if you were meeting them in real life. Make sure you're following them. That's the starting point. You need to follow them so you see what they're posting. Then start engaging with their content. Likes, comments, shares are all much appreciated. It gets the journalist story out there to a wider audience. Then, when you feel the time is right, provide context on industry news or point them in the direction of interesting projects or research. This could be about your company, or it could be even just wider in the industry. Just provide that context and just engage with them like you would do if you were talking to them at a conference. Remember to keep your interactions friendly, without pressure and without expectation. Commit time to building a relationship with them before just expecting coverage and wanting that coverage. You shouldn't expect coverage to happen purely because you've liked a couple of tweets or sent one message their way. Build a relationship like you would do in real life. And with that, Helene is now going to discuss how to talk to journalists in more detail.
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, so now if you listened carefully to all that Lee just said, you may soon celebrate your first successful pitch and a journalist might ask you to give an interview. So don't miss an opportunity like this, because talking to journalists, you get the chance to convey expertise, you get the chance to present your company in the best light. And yeah, that's a good opportunity. But you should be careful though, because speaking to journalists requires a different language than you'd use in a sales pitch or general marketing material. And we'll have a look now at this in detail, at this language. So here's some advice about speaking to journalists that is useful to remember ahead of your interview. Advice number 1, have your story ready. So journalists usually work on multiple stories on any given day, so they probably won't have time to thoroughly research you or your company. And the first thing they are likely to ask you is to introduce yourself and your business. So it's helpful to be prepared for that and to have a concise and sharp introduction ready. When introducing your company, it's helpful and it brings consistency if you refer to assets such as your key messages, your mission and vision statement, and your one-liner. However, it's not just your own story and facts that you need to know. Before the interview, make sure that you're up to date with all your industry's latest developments, whether technological, economic, or legislative. And a good idea that gives your company strong references and can further amplify your key messages is if you offer the journalist to speak to your customers, should they be interested in doing so. So if you do that, you should, of course, make sure that your customers are happy for you to discuss your relationship with them with a journalist before you offer it to the journalist. But if they are, this can be a good opportunity to not just talk about yourself, but let others talk about you. So the next important thing to keep in mind when preparing for an interview is that journalists usually have limited time. Lee said it before, up to 80 pitches each day. So make sure you make the most of their time. And remember that an interview is not the same as marketing promotion. Think about what the journalist is actually interested in. So think about the value you can bring to them and their article. You can think of an interview as completing a jigsaw puzzle. So the journalist already has parts of it figured out, and now your role is to provide the pieces they need to complete it. So these pieces that need to be completed can be information about a topic, it can be impactful statistics, unique insights, or even a controversial opinion they haven't heard yet. But be careful about controversial opinions though, so you shouldn't express your opinion by just criticizing your competitors, because this type of angle isn't a very popular one with journalists, so better avoid it. Whoever is in charge of your PR and communications activities at your company should prepare you ahead of every interview, and you should receive a briefing on the journalist, his or her knowledge of the industry and the topics you want to discuss. But if you are still unsure how much a journalist already knows about you, your company, and your industry, you should always start with the very basics. So it's essential for the success of your interview that you're understandable and that the journalist gets what you want to say. So do not mention anything technical without asking if they want you to explain it first. They will be honest and tell you what they know and what they don't know. So you should always answer questions as helpfully as you can while remaining short and concise. Use short sentences and simple words. You're way easier to understand if you speak in 3 main clauses than if you use one long sentence with several subclauses. So it will help you stay focused and avoid go off on a tangent or down a road you didn't mean. Remember, focus is key. Another important thing to remember is that an interview is never just a conversation, no matter how informal the setting or the conversation topic. So take a deep breath and organize your thoughts before you're providing answers. Also, remember to be yourself. You can be bold, you can be ambitious, but do not oversell your company or technology. An experienced journalist will detect this from a mile away, and it could lead to follow-up questions you're not ready to answer. So as more and more interviews happen online now, first impressions are becoming even more essential. Even if you are meeting on camera as opposed to face-to-face, you should dress in clothes that you're happy for you and your company to be represented in. And furthermore, you should pay attention to your body language. So if you move around a lot, this might convey the journalist that you are insecure, but you don't have to, because usually a journalist won't be trying to trick you. So no need to be defensive. Remind yourself that you're well prepared and that you know your facts and what you want to talk about. And if you are prepared, you can just relax and trust yourself. You shouldn't assume, though, that you will have the right to edit or change your quotes after the interview has taken place and before its publication. So don't say anything you think could cause a problem further down the line, because reviewing quotes is a journalist's prerogative. And because of this, it is important to know when not to overshare. If you don't want to answer a question, you don't have to. So be aware what is on or off the record, on or off the record, but be aware as well that this can vary a lot culturally. So in the UK, for example, nothing is off the record. So it's best to be cautious and not disclose sensitive information you don't want to be used later on by the journalist. However, in Germany, it's different. There are quite strict yet informal rules about the off-the-record conversations. So it might be beneficial to occasionally say things off the record, but then say that it's off the record, of course. You know best which questions can be sensitive to your company, as they probably arise quite often. And so those in charge of your PR should have an FAQ ready for you to prepare a statement in advance that you feel comfortable using. And one final piece of advice, manage your expectations. So in the end, parts of your interview may not be used. It may end up just being a paragraph in a larger article, or the interview may never be published at all. It happens a lot. But keep in mind that one of the most important aspects of being interviewed is helping to build and nurture a relationship with the journalist to benefit your company in the future. And with that, I hand back over to Lee.
Thanks, Helene. So now we're moving on to the fourth part of this webinar, which is about securing mainstream coverage. It doesn't matter if you're part of the senior leadership team responsible for marketing and communications or delivering the technology to customers on the ground. Everybody wants to see high-value mainstream media coverage for their clean tech company. The appeal of seeing the name of your business in well-known publications such as the Financial Times, Forbes, or the BBC is incredibly strong. However, getting into global titles such as these requires time and patience. You need significant milestones and third-party endorsements to receive this kind of coverage. Let me talk you through a few ways you can ensure the approach you take to building your profile is structured and set up for mainstream success. Even if you have customer reference cases and the backing of others to draw upon, the most essential ingredient to securing mainstream media coverage may still be missing. That's your why. Journalists write stories, so make it as easy as possible for them to write yours. The reason you do what you do and have gone down a particular path should tie in with your commercial developments, your company milestones, and your value proposition to create one all-encompassing, fascinating story. This will allow journalists to come on your business journey with you and support your global growth every step of the way. Forging good relationships with journalists takes time and persistence. Before you even think about approaching reporters from mainstream titles, you need to ensure that solid foundations are in place with relevant trade publications. These outlets are usually incredibly loyal and will help build trust with more high-profile journalists. A journalist writing for the publications such as Bloomberg or The Economist will have a healthy appreciation of brand reputation. So we'll look at the coverage your company has received to date. They could even potentially decide on whether to cover you or not based on your current brand recognition. High value media coverage isn't achievable for companies in a lot of industries though. especially clean tech, which is why it's important to manage your expectations early. If you don't expect there to be a regular stream of commercial developments to keep your name in the news, it's likely that mainstream media attention should be your PR focus. If this is the case, you'll probably see far better results and increased sales by achieving targeted, consistent coverage in trade publications. Also, content marketing, such as regularly writing and sharing thought leadership articles or hosting webinars, can be just as effective at building your audience and sharing your unique selling point and brand with the world, enabling you to achieve your commercial goals. I'm now going to share an example of how we've achieved mainstream media attention for one of our clients, and also explain how this has contributed towards their global growth. So when we started working with Danfoss Editron back in 2017, the company was still relatively unknown, a Finnish startup called Visedo. While their profile was fairly low outside of Finland, the team had a bold vision of helping to end pollution globally by electrifying heavy-duty vehicles and machinery. Our team spent several months working with industry media in each of their dedicated markets at the start of our PR campaign with them to build the company's reputation. The work contributed to a significant surge in sales inquiries for Visedo, as the customers they were targeting became aware of them through these trade publications. This enhanced industry standing subsequently helped secure coverage in The Economist, as well as the behind-the-scenes relationship our team built with the journalists for over half a year before pitching to them when the time was right, re-emphasising the importance of building relationships with journalists and not expecting coverage straight away. So our work has helped Visedo gain headline coverage in other mainstream outlets such as The Telegraph, Quartz and the Business Insider, while the company's CEO, Kimo Rauma, also spread his visionary thinking to tens of millions of viewers by appearing on BBC Business Live. These impressive results happened over the course of just 1 year, and this contributed to Visedo being acquired by the Danfoss Group and being renamed Danfoss Editron. And I'm proud to say that we continue to tell their story today, and we've not forgot the trade routes for this campaign either. So we still regularly get their name appearing in trade publications, but they have also been covered by the likes of Forbes subsequently as well. And that brings us to the end of our walkthrough of how to secure impactful coverage for your Cleantech business. We now have time for a Q&A section, and we're looking forward to receiving any questions that you have and answering them for you as well. If you haven't already asked a question, you can do so in the Q&A box. Our colleague Manon, as we mentioned, is behind the scenes. She'll read them out for us on our behalf. So yeah, please fire any questions our way.
Hi, everyone. So we have a first question that I'm going to read. Where do I find the right journalist to talk to?
I'll start with this one. So I think you need to, as I mentioned, browse those trade publications that are in your sector and in your industry to kind of find and identify journalists that are writing about your technology, and also those journalists that are writing positive stories and interesting stories. You can also search online for terms relating to your technology and see which mainstream outlets are covering it when they come up. And also Twitter, as I mentioned earlier as well, growing in importance. So search on Twitter for these terms as well as on search engines and see what comes up. Twitter will obviously be harder because it's going to come up with anyone, not just journalists, but generally you might find some nuggets on there as well. Helena, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I think you said it quite well.
Okay, so we have another one that is a bit related, which is whom should I be sending my press release to?
Yeah, I can maybe answer that one. So I would always say it depends very much on the topic of your press release, who you should be sending it to. So for example, if you have a funding round that is announced, you might send it to investors and startup media as well. While when it is something really industry specific, this might not interest the startup media as much as the industry specific magazines. So I would always start with, if I have the press release, then just think of, okay, who might be interested in this, which magazines, and then I would decide based on this.
Yeah, maybe just to add as well, the importance of pre-pitching. And so if you have journalists in mind that you really want to grab their attention, if you really want this journalist or these journalists to cover this news, it's always valuable to pre-pitch the press release to them. So by pre-pitching, you can send them a press release under embargo a day or two ahead of the full distribution date. And you can say, I'm sending this to you in advance as I feel you'd be interested, and I want to make sure you can plan it into your news schedule. That's always a good way of showing a bit of personality, because you can also personalize the kind of the email that you send. So it's almost like it's a more personal pitch as opposed to a full press release distribution, which is when you use a tool to send out your press releases, it's quite obvious that that's a press release distribution. So if there's target journalists you want to reach, definitely pre-pitch to them.
Thank you. We have a question specific to mainstream journalists. It's how can I make sure that mainstream journalists will be interested in my company?
I think this goes back to the kind of the last section there where I talked about you need this regular stream of news. You need to show that you're an active company. You need to build your brand reputation, really. So make sure that you publicize your projects. Make sure that your vision is clear for all to see in the material you put out on your website. You can even then, when the time is right to contact them, reference the coverage you previously received by sending them like links to more thorough articles that may have been published by trade publications. You've just got to bide your time. It's not going to be easy to get that mainstream coverage, but when you do, it'll be very high value and high impact. So it's going to take time, it's going to take patience, it's going to take a lot of unanswered emails, unfortunately, but build that brand reputation, and over time, assuming you're an active company and you've got your vision clear for all to see, you should catch the attention of mainstream journalists.
Well, speaking of building your brand reputation, I have a question. There is a question around that. So it's, I've never spoken to a journalist. Can I tell them things about my company and trust they will use the information right?
Yeah, maybe I can answer this one. So I would say, of course, you will always have to prepare before speaking to a journalist. But if you are prepared, there's nothing to be afraid, I think. So I think a journalist won't try to twist your words around without a reason. So if you don't give them one, you don't have nothing to worry about. So I would basically say no journalist will try to trick you if you don't try to trick them. So you can, just feel safe talking to them. And but because you should have your information ready and should be sure what to tell them. And I mean, in the best case, you have a good messaging that you know how you want to talk about your company and how you want others to write about. And if you're really concise in how you communicate what your company is doing, this should make sure that the company, that the journalist will talk about your company the same way, I would say.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on to that as well, Helene mentioned earlier that while it's not a given that you'll be able to receive an article or an interview in advance to review, there's no harm in asking the journalist following an interview. So after a couple of days, or for example, here at Life Size, after an interview has taken place, we always contact the journalist to see if they need anything further, whether that's further supporting information or images. So you can always just touch in with the journalist after an interview and just check that they have got everything they need. You can also offer to review quotes relating to the interview. If it's a wider piece, you could offer to review the quotes related to that you provided, just so, you know, as a courtesy that they've got their information correct. The journalist might take you up on that offer and send it, so you've got a chance to review. If they don't, at least you've offered. But yeah, as Helena mentioned, as long as you've got your message in there and FAQ documents, you should be okay.
Thank you. Do you have any suggestion on how to pitch partnerships or collaborations with other impact companies?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think the importance of this one is to have a plan, really. So if you're collaborating with other impact companies on one project, if it's kind of an accelerator, if it's whatever it is, it's important to have a plan. So make sure that there's one representative that's contacting on, either one representative that's contacting all journalists on the project or partnership's behalf, or divide and conquer. So if you've got good relationships already with a number of journalists and you're involved in that collaboration, it makes sense for you to utilize that relationship to pitch and to explain details about it. So just ensure that basically that a journalist isn't going to get contacted by the same person, or that a journalist isn't going to get contacted by 3 people about the same thing, but utilize your existing relationships and make use of them. So I think it's always good to plan in advance, and that's a strategy is not just about long-term campaigns. You need a strategy for each individual announcement as well. So a distribution plan for the press release, and that's a good chance for you to share any journalist relationships you have and make sure that those are being used. I think that answered the question. I don't know, Helene, if you've got anything else you want to add to that.
No, I think you said all that I would have said.
And also maybe just, it's not just with impact companies as well. That can be similar for if you're working with a bigger name customer. The project or press release might be more important to you than it is this bigger name customer. However, it's very important that you push for the press for publicity for your role on that project, whether that's just having a quote in a press release that the customer's pushing out, whether that's being able to do your own press release in full. But again, make use of any existing relationships with journalists. So ask the customer who they're targeting with the news, like if there's anyone in particular that they've got good relationships with that might be interested, and just offer to take part in interviews as well. Always make sure that you're present and available for any publicity.
Thank you. We have a question that it's an issue that we often encounter at LifeSide, which is, what do you do when you can't find the journalist's personal email address?
Oh, yeah. So this is something that we've experienced quite often recently. There's a lot of journalists that aren't putting their telephone number online anymore because they're working from home and they don't want to be bothered at home with calls. So it's more likely that you won't be able to find a number for a journalist in an email anymore. But if for any reason you can't find the email, then you can always try calling the publication. You might get through to someone else in the editorial team who might be able to pass on the email to you. You might get switchboard. It's very rare that I've not been able to get hold of a journalist's email. It's normally the phone number that we can't get hold of. If that fails for whatever reason, if you can't get through to anyone on the phone, you could always try finding a journalist on social media, connecting with them, following them, and asking if they don't have their email on their social media account, which some do. You could ask them for a follow back, so you can send them a private message and ask for it that way.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think you've answered all the open questions for now. In case some other people have more questions to add, please do it now in the Q&A box.
Okay.
Well, if there are no questions left, then just leave it. Okay. Then I think it's time to wrap up now. So thank you all for tuning in. Oh, there is another one, I think.
There is, you're right.
Yeah.
In case of a physical product, does it make sense to send a sample to the press office?
By press office, sorry, David, I can see it's from you. Just by press office, do you mean the journalist, to actually send a product to a journalist? We'll just wait for you to type your answer there before we answer. Yes. So that's an interesting one, because again, with journalists working from home, it depends on how open they are to receiving post or anything at home. And it also depends how big the product is as well. So I'm sure you wouldn't send like a massive engine, for example, or if it's a small product, I would get their permission first. I wouldn't do it without making sure that they're okay with it. Not a yacht, sorry. I mean, the journalists will probably appreciate a yacht. So if you did have a yacht to send them, I think that'd be good. But no, if it's a small product, I'd try and get their permission first. I'd include that in a pitch, as for instance. I'd say in your pitch email, when you're talking about your product, and list its benefits, why it's going to make a difference in the world. And then I say, I actually have a sample of the product I can send you if you want. Would you like to receive this? So don't do it just off the cuff, but get their permission. And I think it's more likely that it will be a journalist from a tech publication that would be interested in receiving an actual physical product as opposed to one from a mainstream one. So yeah, the right journalist might say yes, but get their permission first. And if you have a yacht to send me, then feel free. I'm happy to receive a yacht.
Okay, then I think it's time to wrap up now. Thank you all for your questions and for tuning in today. And yeah, we hope you found today's webinar helpful. And if you have any further questions that come up after the webinar, any feedback or suggestions for future webinar topics, or if you'd like to book a free consultation with us, then please do contact us anytime. So in our obligation-free consultations, we look specifically at the challenges your cleantech company is facing, and we provide 1 or 2 pieces of crucial advice that you can then immediately implement to improve your PR activities, your brand, or your content production. And these consultations are a great way for us to get to know each other and to explore a possible longer-term collaboration. So you know where to find us. You can book a consultation through our website or contact us via email or LinkedIn anytime. So thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your days. Bye
Thanks,
for
everyone.
now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.